A major attack, so what's the reason behind it? Also, Chinese billionaires are now being reined in by Xi Jinping with a rope around their necks. What does this really mean? What exactly is going on? Furthermore, fires are raging in Canada, France, and Spain. And what is the reason behind that? And then there's the Save America Act, which has reached a critical point. So I'm bringing you the latest news today. All right, welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fang Nguyen. Good Morning America. Hello to our YouTube audience. Hello to all our listeners on Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Okay, let's get straight to the point. First, let's talk about the latest developments over the weekend. We all know that the U.S. did not launch a major attack on Iran over the weekend. Not only that, on the 13th and 14th days, there were no bombings at all. So after 12 days of continuous bombing, it's now been paused for 2 or 3 days. So what's the situation? Let's start with the latest most. Trump told a senior Israeli defense reporter named Barak Ravid that the U.S. and Iran are holding deep talks, but warned that if negotiations fail, Washington will resume strong military action. He said the mediators, likely Qatar or Pakistan, asked President Trump to give negotiations one more chance. Anyway, let's take a look back. On Thursday, during an interview with Axios, Trump previewed his plan. He said, "I'm considering a massive attack, larger than ever before. I'm close to making a decision, and we're fully prepared for it." By Friday night, President Trump had put the plan on hold. So over the weekend, everyone was guessing what exactly happened. First, it was for negotiations. It's a start and stop situation, stopping for talks, because after 12 days of fighting, they should have enough leverage. Second, the New York Times published a major article citing internal sources, saying it's because they're running low on weapons. The U.S. military has paused now, waiting for more ammunition production. So what does that mean exactly? The New York Times says that if President Trump launches a major attack, it could trigger fierce retaliation from Iran, and the U.S. wouldn't have enough interceptor missiles. The Pentagon has already used over 1,200 Patriot interceptor missiles in this war, each costing over $4 million. So just for these interceptor missiles alone, that's nearly $5 billion. But that's not the cost isn't the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that the inventory is now worryingly low. U.S. interceptor missiles are basically two types. One is the Patriot missile, specifically the Patriot 3. It's mainly used to intercept ballistic missiles or drones in their terminal phase, flying at low to medium altitudes. It can intercept them. However, only 620 Patriot missiles can be produced each year. The other one is the well-known THAAD missile. THA is used against those incoming ballistic missiles falling from the sky. So at this terminal phase, these ballistic missiles can be intercepted. But as for these THAA missiles, American defense contractors can only build 96 a year. So the numbers are actually quite low. Of course, Iran doesn't have ballistic missiles. They only have what you call cruise missiles and drones. So the main targets for depletion are Patriot missiles. The White House Communications Director, Stephen Chung, said two things. He said the president has always insisted on a diplomatic solution. Second, if Iran continues terrorist activities in the Strait of Hormuz or against allies, the president keeps all options on the table. The New York Times says almost no one in Trump's inner circle thinks this war escalation, is wise, as the strikes backfired, uniting Iran against the outside. But is this report accurate? I'm actually highly skeptical because this New York Times report only cites two anonymous sources without saying who they are. Anonymous sources? Anyone can say that. Anyway, I'm skeptical of their credibility, especially since the New York Times is basically an anti-Trump media outlet. So I'm just sharing this for y'all to consider. Okay, the third possibility, which is media speculation, is a pause in the offensive to prepare for what's next. General Cooper of U.S. Central Command stated that most of the planned bombing targets have been hit, and key targets are now nearly exhausted, meaning they've struck everything they could. Retired U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Robert Harward said, "I believe President Trump is preparing the real option, sending in ground troops to show the Iranian people we're ending this regime. Trump already tried an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, giving them a chance, but they responded by attacking the strait. He said, "I think the president is preparing to go all the way on this." He argues this pause allows the military to prepare for the next phase of escalated operations. So, which one do you think it is? Which scenario? The first is peace talks. The second is an ammo shortage, so they're stockpiling. Third is pausing to prepare for another major escalation. Which one do you think it might be? Okay, everyone can, let's have everyone weigh in, shall we? The first, second, the third option. Right now, it looks like the first one, just for the sake of negotiations, but at the same time, Iran is being very aggressive. Let me tell you about the latest from Iran. Of course, Iran is playing both sides. An anonymous Iranian official told the media their stance is to meet attack with attack. If the U.S. stops, Iran stops military action. And indeed, over the past 2 days, Iran has also stopped its strikes against Gulf nations. But meanwhile, a tanker caught fire after hitting an Iranian mine in the Strait of Hormuz and is sinking near Oman. It's been sunk. This is already the second oil tanker to hit a mine in the past 3 days. Oman and the United States have launched an operation to rescue the crew on board. Secondly, listen closely, a member of Iran's National Security Council, an Iranian lawmaker named Ardestani, stated on Monday that it's natural for China and Russia to say they aren't helping Iran, but in fact, they are. He said, "We don't buy weapons from China. Instead, we get intelligence from them. Their satellites helped us." He also added that Tehran has helped Moscow in the war in Ukraine by providing drones. Is what he's saying the truth? I believe it certainly is. But it's not the whole story. What do I mean by certainly? He explained that Iranian ballistic missiles penetrated the U.S. air defense network in Jordan, hitting U.S. barracks and killing 3 U.S. soldiers, along with another U.S. soldier killed by a missile in Iraq. Now, why is it incomplete? Because he's only telling half the story, right? Does the CCP only provide intelligence and not weapons to Iran? Absolutely not. The CCP provides countless semi-finished products and missile fuel to Iran. It's just like their aid to Mexican drug cartels. They say, "We didn't make fentanyl, we just made it 90% complete. You cartels finished the last 10%. So in the end, you made it." That's the situation. But they claim to the world they don't provide fentanyl, only precursors. Everyone knows what that really means. So as for Russia, are they not providing intelligence? I'll share some news in a moment about what Russia has provided. So it's actually both the CCP and Russia are pushing hard from behind. In related news, Zelensky, regarding Ukraine, Russia and Iran just issued a major statement. According to intelligence, Russian satellites took images of 4 U.S. bases in Bahrain, Jordan, and Kuwait on July 19th and 20th and shared them with Iran. Okay, also, on the 25th, a Ukrainian drone attacked an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea. Whether it was carrying weapons to Russia or from Russia back to Iran, we don't know, but they did sink it. Iran was furious and issued a warning on the 27th, stating that Ukraine's actions violated the UN Charter and would not go unanswered. They warned that Ukraine would face unpredictable consequences, marking Tehran's strongest public statement on the matter to date. So you see, Zelensky is gradually aligning himself with the United States. Over the weekend, as I mentioned the day before yesterday, Zelensky's interview with Laura Loomer was quite interesting. His relationship with Trump is indeed getting better and better. While their political ideologies may not align, in this war, whether it's the Russia-Ukraine war or the U.S.-Iran conflict, both sides are increasingly forming a united front. Although it only affects a few people, we're talking about China's wealthy elite, but I think it says a lot about the future of China as a whole. So what's going on? The Wall Street Journal recently published a report titled "The Party is Over." The party is over, meaning the party's finished or the feast is no more. What's the situation? What's happening? It's talking about a new regulation the CCP recently introduced to control wealth, specifically a new regulation to control offshore wealth. For this, we need to go back to the early 2000s when Chinese tech companies were emerging and needed overseas capital, but foreign investors were afraid to invest, right? If you invest in a Chinese company, will you be able to get your money back? To reassure foreign investors, the CCP opened up what you could call a huge space. Chinese startups could register holding companies or shell companies in offshore locations like the Cayman Islands. It's all the same thing. Meaning the actual entity is in China while the shell company is set up in the Cayman Islands. Since it's an offshore company, it enjoys international financial freedom. Therefore, it can list freely in the United States and Hong Kong rather than being a Chinese company. And then the domestic company does business, right? After making money, it sends it from China to the shell company, and the shell company then pays what are called dividends to overseas shareholders. So after listing, there are Hong Kong investors and investors from the United States stock exchanges, and they get dividends. That's the routine. So from the early 2000s to the early 2020, almost every major tech company in China used this method to list in New York or Hong Kong to raise funds. Which ones are included? Including Alibaba, right? Alibaba's in Cayman, Tencent is in Cayman. It's registered in Cayman and listed in Hong Kong. Alibaba is listed in New York and Hong Kong. Baidu is also like this. Then there's JD.com, Pinduoduo, NetEase, Meituan, Xiaomi, Didi, Kuaishou, Weibo, Trip.com, Bilibili, IQE, and a whole bunch of others. Most are registered in Cayman and then listed in Hong Kong or New York. So what was the result of this practice? The money earned through shell companies becomes offshore wealth, which the owners, the holders, can actually dispose of freely. So what does that mean? The CCP's original system was to attract foreign investment by allowing you to register offshore, right? Because the investment goes into what's called a Cayman Islands company, which is essentially a Chinese company. But regardless, if you're registered in the Cayman Islands, there's at least some legal oversight, right? At least you won't be acting recklessly and the police won't just show up and shut the company down. So it gave them peace of mind. In exchange for the incentive of attracting foreign investment, what was traded was the offshore financial freedom of Chinese entrepreneurs. So it didn't just help entrepreneurs. Thousands of early employees at these companies also created huge offshore wealth as a result. They could freely dispose of this wealth in offshore banks, right? In a sense, it's a kind of offshore financial freedom. As it turns out, now the party is over. The feast is ended. The CCP, over the past few months, through the central banks, securities, regulatory agencies, and tax authorities, has issued a series of announcements, rolling out a whole new set of regulations. The new rules essentially have 3 points. First, Chinese companies can no longer register foreign companies offshore. They must register in China instead. Second, for shares sold on foreign stock markets, the funds obtained from the sale of those shares must be repatriated back to China. Third, for example, directors of Hong Kong listed companies, by directors I mean major shareholders, last year just from selling stocks, the money earned from selling stocks was $7.6 billion. So this money must all be remitted back to mainland China. Third, those holding offshore assets, meaning overseas assets, must now pay taxes or back taxes. Why has this change occurred? To put it simply, in a very common saying, even the landlord has no surplus grain. The CCP has run out of money. The CCP, China's 27 provinces and 4 municipalities all ran deficits in the first quarter of this year. Even the hen that lays the golden eggs, the big hen, Shanghai, had expenditures in the first quarter that exceeded income by 29 billion yuan, a 10% loss, a 10% deficit. So now the CCP has no money and needs money. So how big is the impact of doing this? According to data from the Boston Consulting Group, capital from mainland China is massive. Last year, Hong Kong had 2.9 trillion in assets, surpassing Switzerland to become the world's largest offshore wealth center. And a huge amount of the money in there comes from mainland China. But the final total mentioned, the total is 2.9 trillion. Well, at the same time, let me see. I have another. Okay. Additionally, according to data from UBS, investment offices run by Asian families have become major investors in North America. Half of their investment portfolios are allocated in North America, which is mainly the United States. Then this, as everyone knows, the CCP has always controlled people taking funds abroad. Over the past 20 years, the CCP authorities have set a limit of only $50,000 per person per year for citizens to remit abroad. They strictly control the domestic side, simply put, to prevent wealth from being remitted overseas and to stop capital flight. But doing this now isn't enough. Now they're essentially going after the money that's already outside. The first to be hit was this very famous brokerage called Futu. Futu's boss is Li Hua, who was an early employee of Tencent. After Tencent went public, he became wealthy overnight, then went to Hong Kong to found Futu to help people from mainland China invest in global markets. By the end of the first quarter, his clients had invested nearly $160 billion in Futu, making it one of the largest online brokerages and wealth management firms in Asia. As a result, the CCP fined Futu $270 million in May. The reason was that it illegally assisted in cross-border investment. This is part of a series of penalties against similar companies, including several companies like Futu. Once the news of the fine broke, Futu's stock price plummeted by 30% that same day. But it wouldn't work to bring back all the US dollars either, because the CCP's trade surplus with the outside world is already huge. Last year, it was 1.2 trillion, right? If all those dollars were remitted back home, it would push up the exchange rate of the yuan against the dollar. That would hurt the competitiveness of Chinese exports, meaning Chinese products would become more expensive to sell. So for this reason, capital also needs to flow outward to offset this pressure on the yuan's exchange rate. So China also says, I'm not stopping you from investing abroad. It says we encourage entrepreneurs to continue investing abroad, but under our full control. That is, to make overseas investments through a closed-loop system that the CCP can control and manage. What does that mean? For example, if you have a huge amount of yuan in your hands, right, you can invest in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange or its related asset management companies. They then convert it into US dollars to invest abroad. Finally, the money earned from overseas investments is converted back into yuan and returned to you. That's the idea. So what's the point? The entire investment lifecycle must be kept under government supervision, because Hong Kong is in the hands of the CCP, right? So this new policy also ensures that profits earned overseas are taxed. This is an area that has been unregulated for decades, and now it's being addressed. So simply put, it's about tightening the grip on the overseas money of China's wealthy. Y'all have to come back and be under our control. So I call it putting a rope around the necks of the wealthy. This rope, an overseas rope, is for the part of the neck that extends abroad. So it means that financial freedom abroad is gone. Well, basically, it's not completely gone, but it's mostly gone. So what can be done? What about these wealthy people abroad? I don't mean they're abroad, but what about the overseas wealth of China's rich? Regarding this question, what I want to say is, because this might only affect a few thousand or tens of thousands of people. However, this issue perfectly highlights the CCP's current crisis. Originally, this area was left unregulated because the CCP had money and needed foreign investors to invest in Chinese companies so they could grow. Now, it knows that first. No matter how you try to attract them, it doesn't work. People aren't investing anymore, so your efforts are in vain, and you can't trick them out of their money. And second, they've run out of cash, so now they're playing hardball. This move just now is a bit like killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. Why? Because it'll definitely have two consequences, right? Second, will foreign investors still dare to invest in these 100% Chinese companies? If you register a company in China, how can you attract foreign investment? Second, facing such a future, are Chinese entrepreneurs still willing to risk everything to start a business? In the past, like we said, companies like Alibaba or Tencent would register a company in the Cayman Islands as if they had one foot outside. In the end, they all followed the path of their predecessors, achieving overnight wealth through the New York Stock Exchange. But that path is gone now. So will they still work so hard to start a business? So this move by the CCP actually hurts these tycoons and hurts itself too. So using this, it's actually a move that reveals some kind of crisis within the CCP. So the Wall Street Journal said, the party is over. That's the headline. Maybe it's a pun. Is the feast over or is the party finished? The party is over means the party is finished too, right? So I'm reminded of something Xi Jinping once said back when the Soviet Union collapsed, right? He was acting all tough then. He said that Lady Huarui once wrote a poem, right? It goes, 400,000 men laid down their armor, yet not one was a real man, meaning no real men. He applied this to the Soviet Union, saying 400,000 Soviet communists laid down their armor and not one was a real man. So I've always felt that Chinese tycoons, I think they've really been bullied by Xi Jinping and the CCP. You could say 100,000 tycoons laid down their armor, but is even one of them a real man? I'm just joking. What I mean is that people with resources in today's society have power, or rather a moral responsibility, a higher social responsibility. If you agree with me, at least in the United States, this is appropriate. You say you're Chinese, right? Whether in the United States or overseas, whether you take on that responsibility is up to you to decide. At least for me, for Feng Wei, that's how I see it. Those with resources in their hands have a responsibility. So if overseas Chinese can unite now and use the resources of these tycoons who've been bullied by the CCP to completely tear down the Great Firewall, that'll be the day the CCP falls. The day before yesterday, I interviewed Professor Zhang Qinmo from Taiwan. He specializes in the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and Russia. He's an expert in those fields. He mentioned the 1991 Soviet coup attempt, the 819 coup. That coup failed, didn't it? The coup that tried to restore the old order failed, leading to the collapse and dissolution of the Soviet Union. One reason back then was that they didn't control the media. The Soviet soldiers behind the coup didn't control the media. So because of that, the coup collapsed in just a few days. So freedom of information is very, very critical, especially at key moments. So now, of course, if we ask if Chinese media can help bring about change in China, I think that's almost impossible. But overseas media can provide that. Given the current state of the internet, overseas media can play the role of Chinese media. If overseas media strengthens, and secondly, if the Great Firewall can be riddled with holes or even torn down, I don't think the CCP can survive. So I don't think we can just sit by and watch the CCP constantly destroy the Chinese people, including these tycoons. Shouldn't we turn around and try to bring down the CCP? That's my position or my question. Yeah. Anyway, anyone with aspirations in this regard can come find me. I think we have plenty of plans, but we just don't have the resources. We're on the front lines, putting all our resources into making good media. So yeah, but if we had the resources, many things could be accomplished. Okay, the next news item is about the massive fires in 3 countries. What exactly was the cause? This is the situation right now. It really is. Canada, France, and Spain are burning almost out of control. In the United States, 18 states in the north have been affected. So, of course, many people are saying, including many in the mainstream media, that this is caused by climate change or global warming. But is it really? We'll talk about that in a bit. Let's start with Canada. Looking at the situation there, these are real images of the wildfires. It's truly terrifying. In mid-July, the wildfires in Canada suddenly doubled in intensity. The area burned has now climbed to between 2.8 million and 3 million hectares. How big of an area is that? It's equal to the size of Belgium, and it's still rapidly increasing. Right now, out of 1,000 fire points, only 200 are under control. That leaves 800, or 80%, uncontrolled. And in late July, the hardest hit area shifted to the heavily populated provinces of Ontario and Quebec. The situation has escalated significantly. A massive amount of thick smoke has drifted into the United States. At the peak in mid-July, at least 18 U.S. states issued air quality alerts, affecting over 100 million Americans. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Air Quality Index, or AQI, once hit 644. That's the worst record in the city's history, more than double the previous record. The Midwest, including Chicago and the East Coast, have also been suffering from the combined effects of haze and extreme heat. Similarly, France and Spain and Europe are also engulfed in a massive wildfire crisis. This is a direct consequence of the heat wave that hit Western Europe in late July. The situation is currently worsening. Forestry experts say the fires in Spain and France are among the most extreme wildfires ever seen in Europe in terms of scale, speed of spread, and the pyrocumulus clouds they form. You can see all these individual fires burning. The worst hit in France is the Gironde department in the southwest, where 42,000 hectares are burned. It's called one of France's largest fires since World War II. The fire at one point pushed toward the famous port city of Bordeaux, threatening the city and its surrounding areas. 250,000 people have already been evacuated from this region. 55,000 of them were evacuated just last night, an emergency evacuation on Sunday night. Spain is also in a tight spot. So far this year, 130,000 hectares have been destroyed, more than double the area in France. Nearly 120,000 people have evacuated, mostly west of Madrid and along the east coast near Valencia. So what exactly is the common cause behind all this? We have to ask ourselves that. The common culprit is, of course, the extreme and persistent heat waves, combined with the drought.